The rifle shot echoed through Willow Creek, silencing even the cicadas that had been singing in the summer heat of 1872. Lillian Taylor lowered her weapon, satisfaction warming her chest as she observed the tin can she'd knocked clean off the fence post from 50 yards away. At 22, she'd become the finest shot in the county, not that anyone besides her father would admit it. Another perfect hit, she whispered to herself, blowing away the wisp of smoke rising from the barrel of her Winchester. The weapon had been her father's parting gift before consumption took him 2 winters past, leaving her alone with their struggling ranch and a reputation that made the townsfolk uncomfortable. Lillian tucked a wayward strand of auburn hair behind her ear and squinted against the setting sun. Time to head back. She had chores waiting, and dawdling would only mean working by lantern light again. As she turned toward home, she caught sight of riders approaching on the main road, the McIntosh brothers and their cronies returning from the saloon, no doubt. She considered cutting across the meadow to avoid them, but straightened her shoulders instead. This was her land they were passing. She wouldn't skulk around like some frightened rabbit. "Well, look what we got here," Hank McIntosh called out, pulling his horse to a stop. His 3 companions followed suit, creating a barrier across the road. Little Miss Taylor, playing with her daddy's gun again. Lillian clutched the rifle tighter but kept it pointed downward. "Evening, gentlemen. I'm just heading home." "Ain't natural," said the youngest McIntosh, barely older than Lillian herself. "A woman carrying a rifle like she's some kind of man." "What's unnatural is your face, Bert," Lillian replied, unable to help herself. "But I don't comment on it every time I see you." The men laughed, though not kindly. Hank dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he landed. "You know what folks say about you, don't you?" He took a step closer. "That old man Taylor raised himself a daughter who thinks she's a son. No wonder you can't find yourself a husband." "I haven't been looking," Lillian said coolly, though the words stung more than she cared to admit. "Maybe that's for the best," Hank continued, emboldened by his friend's snickers. "What man would want a wife who'd likely shoot him if he burned the breakfast?" "Step aside, Hank." Lillian kept her voice steady. "I'd like to get home before dark." "You should sell that place," Bert called from atop his horse. "Women can't run ranches. Everyone knows that." "Everyone seems to know an awful lot about my business," Lillian said. She took a step forward, but Hank didn't budge. "That rifle ain't gonna save your ranch," Hank said. "Winter's coming, and word is you're behind on your banknote. Might be time to consider Mr. Grantham's offer before the bank takes it anyway." Before Lillian could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. A rider appeared around the bend, tall in the saddle on a magnificent chestnut stallion. "Evening," the stranger called out, his voice deep and measured. He pulled his horse to a stop, taking in the scene before him with sharp blue eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. "Is there a problem here?" Hank turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Nothing that concerns you, mister. Just having a friendly chat with the lady." The stranger's gaze moved to Lillian, then to the rifle in her hands, and back to the men blocking her path. "Doesn't look all that friendly to me." "We were just leaving," Bert said quickly, sensing a shift in the air. Hank shot him a glare but mounted his horse nonetheless. "You think about what I said, Lillian," Hank warned as he gathered his reins. "That rifle ain't fitting for a lady, and it sure won't save your ranch." With that, he spurred his horse and rode off, his companions close behind. The stranger watched them go before turning back to Lillian. "You all right, madam?" Lillian nodded, studying him. He wasn't from around these parts, his clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and his saddle spoke of craftsmanship not common in Willow Creek. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, "though I could have handled them myself." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I believe you could have. That's a fine Winchester." "It was my father's," she replied, surprised by his comment. Most men would have lectured her about the dangers of firearms by now. You look like you know how to use it. He dismounted with an easy grace and approached, leading his horse. Name's Isaiah Marshall. I'm looking for work in these parts. Lillian Taylor. She hesitated before extending her hand, which he shook firmly. What kind of work? Ranch hand, primarily. I've worked cattle from Texas to Montana. Lillian studied him. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, but there was a steadiness to his gaze that suggested he'd seen his share of hardship. Well, Mr. Marshall, you've come to the right place if you're looking for cattle. Wrong place if you're looking for pay, I'm afraid. She gestured in the direction of her ranch. I can't afford to hire anyone right now. Isaiah nodded, unsurprised. Times are hard all over. Is there somewhere in town I might inquire about work? Lillian thought for a moment. The Double B might be hiring for the fall roundup. Though Bernard Baker isn't known for his generosity. I appreciate the information. He tipped his hat and turned to remount. Lillian watched him, thoughts racing. Her ranch desperately needed help, especially with winter approaching. She couldn't pay wages, but maybe. Mr. Marshall, she called out. I can't pay you proper, but I can offer room and board if you're willing to help with my ranch. There's not much, just 40 head of cattle and some repairs that need doing. But it's honest work, and the meals are decent. Isaiah paused, one foot in the stirrup. He turned to look at her, his expression curious. Most folks wouldn't trust a stranger like that, Miss Taylor. Most folks have other options, she replied frankly. I don't. Besides, anyone the McIntosh brothers take an immediate dislike to can't be all bad. A genuine smile spread across his face then, transforming his features. You make a compelling point. He dropped back to the ground. I accept your offer, at least temporarily. If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings. Agreed, Lillian said, feeling both relief and apprehension. The ranch is just down this road, about a mile further. They walked side by side, the setting sun casting long shadows before them. Lillian kept her rifle cradled in her arms, a habit born of necessity. They give you trouble often? Isaiah asked, nodding toward the direction the McIntosh brothers had disappeared. Often enough, Lillian admitted. They work for Edward Grantham, who owns the largest spread around here. He's been trying to buy my land since my father passed. And you don't want to sell? It's all I have left of my family, she said simply. Besides, I'm doing fine on my own. Isaiah glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I noticed they had particular opinions about your rifle. Lillian snorted. The whole town does. They think it's unladylike. As if being ladylike would keep the wolves from my livestock or put food on my table. They crested a small hill, and the Taylor Ranch came into view, a modest house with a barn and corral, nestled against the backdrop of the foothills. It had seen better days, with the barn roof showing signs of needed repair and the fence around the corral missing several boards. Home sweet home, Lillian said, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice despite the property's obvious troubles. It's got good bones, Isaiah observed. Good water too, I'd wager, from that creek. Best water in the county, she confirmed. That's why Grantham wants it. His streams run dry by August. As they approached the house, Lillian felt a sudden wave of self-consciousness. It had been just her for so long, she hadn't bothered with many niceties. The porch needed sweeping, and she'd left breakfast dishes on the table that morning in her rush to check on a calf. It's not much, she said apologetically as she led him to the barn first. There's a small room off the tack area where my father's hired man used to stay. It's simple but dry. Isaiah nodded, assessing the space. I've slept in far worse. This will do fine. You can put your horse in the corral for now. I'll show you where the feed is. She hesitated. If you don't mind, I'd like to see to dinner. You must be hungry after traveling. That would be most welcome, Miss Taylor. I'll settle my horse and join you shortly. Lillian hurried to the house, grateful for the chance to tidy up before he came inside. As she cleared the breakfast dishes and stoked the stove, her mind raced with questions. Who was this Isaiah Marshall? Why had he appeared just when she needed help the most? And why did she, who trusted almost no one these days, feel comfortable enough to invite him to stay? By the time Isaiah knocked on the door, she had a pot of stew warming and had managed to make the kitchen presentable. She called for him to enter and turned to find him filling the doorway, hat in hand. Something smells good, he said, his eyes taking in the simple but clean kitchen. Just a rabbit stew. Nothing fancy, she replied, suddenly aware of how different her life was from most women her age. They would be cooking for husbands and children, not strange cowboys they'd met on the road. Please sit. I'll get you some coffee. Isaiah settled at the table, placing his hat on an empty chair. Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Taylor. It's been a while since I've had a home-cooked meal. Call me Lillian, she said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Miss Taylor makes me feel like the schoolmarm. He smiled at that. Lillian it is, then. And I'm Isaiah. She sat across from him, studying him in the lamplight. He had a strong face, with a jawline shadowed by stubble and eyes that seemed older than his years. Where are you from originally, Isaiah? She asked. Missouri, though I haven't been back in many years. He took a sip of coffee. My parents had a small farm there, but after they passed, there wasn't much reason to stay. I'm sorry about your parents. He nodded in acknowledgement. Life out here has a way of taking people before their time. Your father, was it recently? 2 winters ago, Lillian replied, the grief still fresh enough to make her chest tighten. Consumption. He was sick for a long time before that. And your mother? When I was 14. Fever took her. Lillian stirred her coffee, remembering. My father taught me everything after that, how to run the ranch, how to shoot, how to survive. He taught you well, from what I can see. Lillian looked up, surprised to find no condescension in his eyes, only genuine respect. Most men don't think women should learn such things. Most men are fools, Isaiah said simply. Out here, survival doesn't care if you're wearing trousers or skirts. A comfortable silence fell between them as Lillian served the stew. They ate without much conversation, but the quiet wasn't awkward. There was something reassuring about Isaiah's presence, steady, like the mountains on the horizon. When they finished, Isaiah insisted on helping with the dishes despite Lillian's protests. As they worked side by side, she outlined what needed doing around the ranch: the barn roof, the broken corral fence, preparing the herd for winter. It's a lot for one person, Isaiah observed as he dried a bowl. It is, Lillian admitted. But I've managed. At what cost? He asked quietly. She paused, hands in the wash basin. What do you mean? I mean, you look tired, Lillian. Not just today tired, but bone-deep tired. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. Lillian stared at her reflection in the water, distorted and wavering. He was right, of course. She was exhausted, had been for months, years even. But admitting it felt dangerous, like once she acknowledged it, she might crumble completely. I'm fine, she said, resuming her washing. And I'm grateful for your help, however long you choose to stay. Isaiah didn't push, and for that she was thankful. They finished the dishes in silence, and soon after, he excused himself to the barn. Alone in the house, Lillian prepared for bed, her routine unchanged but her thoughts in turmoil. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't truly alone on the ranch. The knowledge was both comforting and unsettling. As she drifted off to sleep, her father's rifle propped against the wall beside her bed as always, She wondered what tomorrow would bring with Isaiah Marshall's presence on the Taylor ranch. Dawn broke crisp and clear, with the promise of heat later in the day. Lillian rose with the sun, as was her custom, and was surprised to find smoke already rising from the kitchen stove. When she entered, dressed for the day's work, she found Isaiah at the stove, frying bacon. "Hope you don't mind," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Thought I'd get breakfast started." "Not at all," she replied, genuinely surprised. "You're up early. Old habits." He flipped the bacon with practiced ease. "I figured we could get an early start on that barn roof. Storm clouds building in the west might have rain by tomorrow." Lillian peered out the window. Sure enough, the distant horizon showed the faint haze that often preceded a storm. "Good eye. Most folks around here can't read the weather until it's on top of them. When your life depends on it, you learn quick." He slid the bacon onto 2 plates and cracked eggs into the hot fat. "Coffee's ready if you want to pour." They ate quickly, discussing the day's work. Isaiah had already checked the barn and found most of the materials they would need for repairs, leftover lumber from when her father had expanded the hayloft years ago. "Your father was a forward-thinking man," Isaiah commented as they headed outside after breakfast. "Keeping materials on hand like that. He always said it was cheaper to be prepared than to pay rush prices when something broke," Lillian replied, feeling a surge of pride in her father's wisdom. The morning passed in steady work. Isaiah proved to be skilled with tools and seemed to know instinctively what needed doing without much direction. By midday, they had repaired half the barn roof, working together with an efficiency that surprised Lillian. She was used to doing everything herself, having to think through each step alone, but Isaiah anticipated her needs and complimented her efforts. As they broke for a quick lunch of bread and cold bacon, sitting in the shade of an old oak tree, Lillian found herself studying her new hired hand. There was something comforting about his presence, steady, reliable, without the swagger that so many cowboys possessed. "What?" Isaiah asked, catching her gaze. Lillian flushed slightly, embarrassed to be caught staring. "Nothing. Just wondering where you learned to work like this. You seem to know your way around a ranch." "Worked on a lot of them," he replied, taking a drink from the water jug. "Started as a boy doing odd jobs, then ranch hand, then foreman for a while up in Wyoming." "You pick things up along the way." "Foreman? That's quite a position. Why leave it?" A shadow passed across his face. The owner's son took over after the old man died. Had different ideas about how things should be run. Didn't see eye to eye. Lillian sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. She certainly did. "Well, I'm grateful you happened by when you did," she said instead. "At this rate, we might actually get the place ready for winter." Isaiah smiled, and Lillian noticed how it transformed his face, softening the hard lines earned from years under the sun. "Happy to help. It's a good piece of land you have here. Worth saving." They returned to work, moving from the barn roof to the corral fence. By late afternoon, they had replaced the broken boards and reinforced several weak spots. Lillian's muscles ached pleasantly from the labor. It had been a long time since she'd accomplished so much in a single day. As the sun began its descent, Isaiah suggested they check on the cattle before darkness fell. Lillian nodded, fetching her rifle from where she'd propped it against the barn wall. "You always carry that with you?" Isaiah asked as they walked toward the pasture. "Nearly always," Lillian admitted. "There have been wolves in these parts, and occasionally a mountain lion comes down from the higher elevations. Not to mention 2-legged predators." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "You've had trouble?" "Some," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't want to elaborate. "Nothing I couldn't handle." They reached the edge of the pasture where her small herd grazed. The cattle looked up at their approach, a few of the younger ones trotting over curiously. "They look healthy," Isaiah observed. "Good weight on them for this time of year." The grass is good here, Lillian said with pride. Even in dry years, this valley holds moisture better than most. Is that why Grantham wants it? Partly, but mainly it's the water rights. Whoever owns this land controls access to the best stream in the county. She pointed to where the creek cut through the property. In a drought year, that's the difference between success and failure. Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. And the McIntosh brothers, they work for him? They do his dirty work, Lillian said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Hank's been trying to intimidate me into selling since my father died. Started with friendly advice, and has gotten less friendly as time goes on. Have they ever threatened me directly? Lillian finished for him. No, but cattle have gone missing. Fences have been cut. Nothing I could prove was them, of course. Isaiah's expression darkened. That's not right. It's the way of things out here, she said with a shrug that belied her true feelings. The big ranchers take what they want, and the rest of us try to hold on to what's ours. They finished checking the herd in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they walked back to the house in the golden light of sunset, Lillian felt a strange sense of comfort in Isaiah's presence. It had been so long since she'd had anyone to share the burden of the ranch with even temporarily. I'll get dinner started, she said as they approached the house. You're welcome to wash up at the pump. Isaiah nodded. Thank you. I'll tend to the horses first. Lillian watched him head toward the barn, his tall figure silhouetted against the evening sky. There was something about the set of his shoulders that spoke of reliability, of a man who carried his responsibilities without complaint. She found herself hoping he might stay longer than just a few days, though she knew better than to count on it. Inside, she busied herself preparing a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, with the last of the morning's bacon crumbled into the beans for flavor. As she worked, she realized she was humming something she hadn't done in longer than she could remember. Isaiah returned as she was setting the table, his hair damp from washing and his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. Smells good, he said, taking the seat she indicated. Nothing fancy, she replied, the phrase becoming something of a refrain. But filling. They ate with the comfortable silence of people who had worked hard together. Afterward, Isaiah again helped with the dishes, and they sat at the table with cups of coffee, discussing what needed doing the next day. If those storm clouds keep building, we should make sure the roof is completely secure, Isaiah said. After that, maybe we should ride the property line, check for any other fences that need mending. Lillian nodded, appreciating his practical approach. There's a section on the north boundary that's been giving me trouble. I patched it last month, but it wasn't a proper job. We'll take care of it, Isaiah assured her. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. Lillian, those men yesterday, the McIntosh brothers. They mentioned you being behind on your banknote. She stiffened slightly. They talk too much. Is it true? Lillian sighed, staring into her coffee cup as if it might contain a solution. Yes, the drought last year hit everyone hard. I had to sell more cattle than I wanted to keep going. Didn't leave much for the bank. How far behind? 2 payments, she admitted reluctantly. I have until the first snow to make good, or they'll start foreclosure proceedings. Isaiah frowned. That doesn't give you much time. No, it doesn't. Lillian met his gaze directly. That's why I can't pay you proper wages, though I wish I could. I'm not worried about wages, he said, but I am concerned about your situation. Is there no other way to raise the money? Lillian laughed, though there was little humor in it. Short of robbing the bank myself? No. I've sold everything of value except the land itself and what I need to work it. The cattle I have left are my breeding stock. Selling them would be the end of the ranch anyway. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. What about a partnership? Are there any smaller ranchers around who might join forces with you? Most have already sold out to Grantham, she replied. Those who haven't aren't doing much better than I am. She sighed. Besides, no man in these parts wants a partnership with a woman, especially one who insists on carrying a rifle and doing a man's work. Their loss, Isaiah said simply. Lillian looked up, surprised by the conviction in his voice. You really believe that, don't you? I've known plenty of women who could outwork, outshoot, and outthink most men I've met, he said. My own mother ran our farm for 3 years while my father was away during the war. Never saw why a woman couldn't do whatever she set her mind to. A warm feeling spread through Lillian's chest at his words. It had been so long since anyone had expressed faith in her abilities rather than doubt or condescension. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Isaiah cleared his throat and glanced away first. We should get some rest, he said, rising from the table. Tomorrow will be another long day. Lillian nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate the kitchen felt in the lamplight. Yes, good night, Isaiah. Good night, Lillian, he replied, donning his hat and stepping out into the darkness. After he left, Lillian sat alone at the table for a long while, wondering at the strange turn her life had taken in just one day. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest, dangerous, perhaps, but impossible to ignore. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Lillian and Isaiah worked quickly to finish the barn roof, racing against the weather. By midday, dark clouds hung low over the mountains, and the air had taken on the electric feel that preceded a storm. We should check that north boundary before the rain hits, Isaiah suggested as they secured the last of the roofing materials. Lillian agreed, and they saddled their horses, her reliable bay mare and Isaiah's chestnut stallion. As always, her rifle rested in its scabbard on her saddle. They rode in companionable silence, Isaiah following Lillian's lead across the rolling grassland of her property. The cattle they passed looked up curiously but continued grazing, unbothered by the approaching storm. Your herd seems calm around you, Isaiah observed. That speaks well of how you handle them. My father always said cattle are like people, they respond best to those who treat them with consistent respect, Lillian replied. Though I suspect they're just used to me. I'm out with them nearly every day. Isaiah nodded. It shows. Even the best cowboys can't fake that kind of relationship with livestock. They reached the northern boundary, marked by a fence line that separated the Taylor Ranch from unclaimed land that eventually rose into the foothills. As Lillian had mentioned, a section of the fence had been hastily repaired, with wire holding together broken posts. This wasn't wind or weather damage, Isaiah said, dismounting to examine the fence more closely. His fingers traced splintered wood. This was deliberate. Lillian joined him on the ground, her rifle in hand as a precaution. I thought as much, but I didn't want to believe it. Found 3 of my cattle on the wrong side of the fence last month. Isaiah's expression hardened. The McIntosh brothers? Can't prove it, Lillian said with a shrug that didn't quite hide her anger. But they've been seen riding in these parts, and they have no business here. They set about making proper repairs, working efficiently together despite the darkening sky. Just as they hammered the last post into place, the first fat raindrops began to fall. Perfect timing, Isaiah said, looking up at the clouds. Though we're still going to get wet on the ride back. Lillian laughed, the sound surprising even her. I can't remember the last time I worried about getting wet. Usually, I'm just grateful for the rain, whatever it does to my comfort. Isaiah smiled at her, raindrops already darkening his hat. A practical outlook. Necessity, she replied, swinging back into her saddle. They had just turned their horses toward home when a rifle shot cracked through the air, the bullet kicking up dirt just feet from them. Both horses reared in alarm, and Lillian had to fight to keep her seat. "Get down!" Isaiah shouted, already dismounting and pulling his horse behind the scant cover of a large rock. Lillian followed suit, her heart pounding as she drew her rifle. Another shot rang out, this one hitting the fence post they'd just repaired. "Can you see where it's coming from?" she asked, scanning the tree line at the edge of her property. "Up there in those pines," Isaiah replied, his voice calm despite the danger. "Looks like two riders." Lillian squinted through the intensifying rain and caught movement among the trees. "Macintosh," she spat. "Has to be." A third shot came closer still, splintering wood nearby. "We need to move," Isaiah said. "They have the high ground. If we stay here, they'll eventually get lucky." "The creek bed," Lillian suggested, pointing to where the stream cut through her property about 100 yards to their right. "It's low from the dry summer. We can use it for cover to get closer to the house." Isaiah nodded. "You go first. I'll cover you." Before Lillian could protest, he raised his revolver and fired twice in quick succession toward the trees, forcing their attackers to duck. She seized the moment to run, leading her nervous horse toward the creek bed. The rain was falling steadily now, reducing visibility and turning the ground slick. She reached the embankment and slid down into the shallow water, pulling her horse after her. Moments later, Isaiah joined her, his expression grim but composed. "Are you all right?" he asked, checking her over with his eyes. "Fine," she assured him. "You? Never better," he replied with a wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Though I didn't expect a shooting match when I signed on." They began moving along the creek bed, staying low. The banks provided good cover, and the rain would make it difficult for the Macintosh brothers to track them accurately. "I'm sorry about this," Lillian said as they waded through ankle-deep water. "You didn't ask to be shot at." "Neither did you," Isaiah pointed out. "Besides, men like that, they're bullies. They only understand one thing." Lillian glanced at him, noting the hard set of his jaw. "You've dealt with their kind before." "More often than I'd like," he admitted. "There's always someone who thinks might makes right." They had traveled perhaps a quarter-mile when they heard hoofbeats retreating in the distance. The brothers were leaving for now. "Should we go after them?" Lillian asked, her rifle still at the ready. Isaiah shook his head. "Not worth it. They're running, and the rain will wash away any tracks. Better to get back and make sure the house is secure." They climbed out of the creek bed and mounted their horses, riding hard through the downpour toward the ranch house. By the time they arrived, they were both soaked to the skin, but Lillian felt oddly exhilarated. It had been a long time since she'd had someone at her side in a fight. They stabled the horses quickly and hurried to the house. Inside, Lillian built up the fire while Isaiah checked all the windows and doors. "I think we're safe for now," he said, returning to the kitchen where Lillian was wringing water from her hair. "They'd be fools to try anything in this weather, and even the Macintosh brothers aren't that stupid." "Don't underestimate them," Lillian warned. "Hank especially. He holds grudges." "So do I," Isaiah said quietly, and something in his tone made Lillian look at him more carefully. "You're not what I expected," she said before she could stop herself. "What did you expect?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Most drifters passing through are looking for easy work and quick money. You seem different." Isaiah busied himself removing his soaked coat. "I've been drifting a while. Gets old after a time. So why keep doing it?" He was quiet for a moment, hanging his coat near the fire. "Sometimes a man leaves things behind that can't be outrun, no matter how far he travels." There was a wealth of meaning in those words, and Lillian sensed a story that ran deep. But she also recognized the desire for privacy. She had her own secrets, after all. "You should change into dry clothes," she said instead. I might have something of my father's that would fit you. She found an old shirt and trousers in a chest, relics of her father's life that she hadn't been able to part with. Isaiah accepted them with thanks and went to the barn to change, while Lillian changed into a dry dress. When he returned, they sat before the fire, listening to the rain hammer on the roof. The storm had settled in for the evening, turning the world outside dark and forbidding. Do you think they'll come back? Lillian asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Not tonight, Isaiah replied, but eventually, yes. Men like that don't give up easily, especially when they have someone like Grantham backing them. What would you do? She asked. If this were your land, your fight? Isaiah considered her question, watching the flames. I'd make it clear that I wasn't going anywhere, but I wouldn't go looking for trouble either. Sometimes the best defense is to be so firmly rooted that trying to remove you becomes more trouble than it's worth. That's what my father always said, Lillian said softly. He used to tell me that this land was our anchor in a changing world, and as long as we held on to it, we'd never be truly lost. He sounds like a wise man. He was. She sighed, memories washing over her. I miss his counsel most of all. When problems arose, he always knew what to do. You seem to be doing fine on your own, Isaiah observed. Better than fine, considering the circumstances. Lillian shook her head. I'm barely holding on. If I lose the banknote, we'll figure something out, Isaiah said with a certainty that surprised her. We? She echoed, meeting his gaze. He looked away, as if he'd said more than he intended. Figure of speech. But I don't aim to leave you in the lurch, Lillian. Not with those wolves circling. Something warm unfurled in Lillian's chest at his words, not just the promise of help, but the way he'd said her name, as if it mattered to him. Thank you, she said simply. They spent the evening planning their next steps, which repairs were most urgent. How to secure the boundaries of the property better. Strategies for dealing with the McIntosh brothers if they returned. Through it all, Lillian was struck by how easily they worked together. How Isaiah treated her as an equal partner rather than a helpless woman needing direction. When they finally parted for the night, Lillian found herself reluctant to see him go. It had been so long since she'd had companionship of any kind, let alone someone who seemed to understand her struggles so intuitively. As she lay in bed listening to the rain, her rifle propped against the wall as always, Lillian tried to make sense of her feelings. Isaiah Marshall had appeared in her life so suddenly, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. But experience had taught her that good things rarely lasted, and that depending on others was a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet as sleep claimed her, her last thought was of the certainty in his voice when he'd said, "We'll figure something out." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and strangely familiar to Lillian. Each morning, she and Isaiah would share breakfast before tackling the day's work together. With the immediate repairs to the barn and fences complete, they turned their attention to preparing for winter chopping and stacking firewood, mending tack, checking the cattle for any signs of illness. Throughout it all, Lillian found herself watching Isaiah when he wasn't looking, the competent way his hands moved, the quiet focus he brought to every task. He worked without complaint from dawn to dusk, often taking on the heaviest labor without being asked. A week after his arrival, they rode into town together for supplies. Lillian had been avoiding the trip, knowing the reception she would likely receive, but they needed flour and coffee, and Isaiah had offered to accompany her. As they rode down the main street of Willow Creek, Lillian was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Her rifle, as always, was secured in its scabbard on her saddle, a fact that never failed to draw disapproving looks from the townspeople. "Seems you're something of a local celebrity," Isaiah remarked quietly as they dismounted in front of the general store. "More like a local scandal," Lillian replied dryly. "The unmarried woman who refuses to sell her ranch or put away her gun." Isaiah's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Their loss. Inside the store, Mrs. Peterson, the proprietor's wife, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. Miss Taylor, it's been a while since we've seen you in town. Been busy at the ranch, Mrs. Peterson? Lillian replied politely, handing over her short list of supplies. The older woman's eyes darted to Isaiah, who was examining a display of tools. I see you've found some help. Mr. Marshall is working for me, yes? Lillian said, her tone discouraging further questions. But Mrs. Peterson was not so easily deterred. Such a blessing for you, dear. A woman alone on a ranch, it's not natural. My husband was saying just the other day that it's high time you considered Mr. Grantham's offer. With the bank note coming due and all. Lillian stiffened. My financial arrangements are my own concern, Mrs. Peterson. Of course, dear, but people talk. And with winter coming. The woman lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Not to mention those Macintosh boys spreading word that you've taken up with a drifter of questionable character. Before Lillian could respond, Isaiah appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. Mrs. Peterson, I believe Miss Taylor asked for flour, coffee, and salt. We'd appreciate having those items wrapped up promptly. We have a long ride home. Something in his tone not threatening, but brooking no argument had Mrs. Peterson scurrying to fill the order. Lillian shot him a grateful look. Questionable character, she murmured. I've been called worse, he replied with a wry smile. They paid for their supplies and were turning to leave when the door opened, admitting Hank McIntosh and his youngest brother, Bert. The atmosphere in the store instantly thickened with tension. Well now, isn't this cozy? Hank drawled, blocking their path to the door. The spinster and her hired gun, out for a day in town. Isaiah stepped slightly forward, placing himself between Lillian and the McIntosh brothers. We're just leaving, gentlemen. No need for unpleasantness. Bert snickered. Hear that, Hank? No need for unpleasantness. Mighty fine words from a man who took shots at us the other day. After you fired on us first, Lillian pointed out, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. Now, that's a misunderstanding, Hank said, his false smile never reaching his eyes. We were just out hunting, and you two happened to be in the wrong place. On my land, Lillian added. Debatable, Hank replied. That northern boundary has always been contested. Besides, Mr. Grantham has a legitimate claim to water rights that your father never properly acknowledged. Isaiah's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, but Lillian sensed the coiled tension in him. Seems to me that if Mr. Grantham has a claim, there are legal channels to pursue it. Shooting at people isn't one of them. Big talk from a man with no stake in this county, Hank said, his smile fading. You're just passing through, Marshall. Don't make the mistake of thinking you belong here. That's not for you to decide, Isaiah replied calmly. Hank's eyes narrowed. Maybe not, but Mr. Grantham has a long memory and friends in high places. Might be worth considering before you get too comfortable at the Taylor place. With that, he stepped aside, allowing them to pass. As they left the store, Lillian could feel the brothers' stares burning into her back. Outside, as they secured their purchases to their saddles, Lillian finally released the breath she'd been holding. I'm sorry about that. The McIntosh brothers have a talent for making even simple errands difficult. Not your fault, Isaiah assured her. Men like that exist everywhere. They only have power if people give it to them. They mounted up and began the ride home, both lost in thought. The encounter in the store had left Lillian feeling exposed and vulnerable, but also oddly strengthened by Isaiah's steady presence beside her. They were shooting at us deliberately, weren't they? She asked after they'd ridden in silence for a while. Not hunting like they claimed. Isaiah nodded grimly. Yes, it was a warning or an attempt to scare you off the property. It would take more than a few potshots to do that, Lillian said with determination. Isaiah glanced at her, admiration clear in his eyes. "I believe it would. You're made of stronger stuff than they realize." The simple compliment warmed Lillian more than it should have. "Thank you for standing with me back there." Most men would have stepped aside when faced with the McIntosh brothers and their connections. "I'm not most men," Isaiah said quietly. "No, Lillian thought you certainly aren't." When they reached the ranch, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples. As they stabled the horses and unpacked their supplies, Lillian found herself stealing glances at Isaiah, wondering at the mysteries that lay beneath his composed exterior. Over dinner that night, she finally worked up the courage to ask more about his past. "You mentioned you were a foreman in Wyoming. What happened there, really?" Isaiah paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. For a moment, she thought he might evade the question, but then he sighed and set his fork down. "The owner's son wasn't just changing how the ranch was run," he said, his voice measured. "He was cruel to the men, to the livestock. Thought fear was the best motivator." His jaw tightened at the memory. "When I spoke up, he didn't take it kindly. Things escalated." "Did you hurt him?" Lillian asked, sensing there was more to the story. "No," Isaiah replied, "but I wanted to. I've seen what becomes of men who solve problems with their fists when words would suffice. I didn't want to become that." He met her gaze. "So I left. Been drifting since, taking work where I can find it." "And before Wyoming?" A shadow crossed his face. "I rode with a cattle outfit in Texas for a while. Before that, I tried my hand at mining in Colorado. Never could settle in one place for long." "Why not?" Lillian pressed gently. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, staring at his plate as if the answer might be written there. "After my parents died, home never felt like home again. Easier to keep moving than to put down roots that might get torn up." The simple honesty of his words struck a chord in Lillian. She understood that feeling all too well, the fear of losing what you loved, the temptation to protect yourself by never becoming too attached to people or places. "I understand," she said softly. "After my father died, I considered selling up and moving on, starting fresh somewhere people didn't know me as poor Thomas Taylor's odd daughter with the rifle. Why didn't you? This land is all I have left of them, my parents. Their dreams, their hard work. It felt like betraying them to walk away." She sighed. "Maybe that's foolish." "It's not foolish to honor those you've lost," Isaiah said. "But I think your parents would want you to be happy, above all else." Lillian looked at him, struck by how easily he seemed to understand her deepest thoughts. "And what about you, Isaiah? What would make you happy?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was silent for so long that Lillian began to regret asking. But when he finally spoke, his voice was soft with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Peace, maybe. A place where the past doesn't follow quite so closely. Work that means something." His eyes met hers across the table. Connection. The word hung between them, laden with possibility. Lillian felt her pulse quicken, aware of a shift in the air, a deepening of whatever had been growing between them these past days. Before she could respond, a noise outside broke the moment, the distinct sound of a horse approaching at speed. They both rose instantly, Isaiah reaching for the revolver he kept at his side, Lillian for her rifle. "Stay inside," Isaiah said, moving toward the door. "Not likely," Lillian replied, checking that her rifle was loaded. "This is my home." He gave her a look that mingled exasperation with admiration before nodding. "Stay behind me, at least." They stepped onto the porch, weapons ready. In the fading light, they could make out a single rider approaching, not one of the McIntosh brothers, but a young boy of perhaps 15, riding a lathered horse that had clearly been pushed hard. "Miss Taylor," the boy called out as he drew closer. "Miss Taylor, come quick. It's Old Man Jenkins. There's been an accident at his place. He's asking for you." Lillian recognized the boy as Peter Wilson, whose family ran the small farm adjacent to Jenkins's property. "What happened, Peter?" "Barn collapsed on him," the boy panted, pulling his horse to a stop. "He's trapped bad. Pa's trying to get him out, but we need more hands. Mr. Jenkins was calling for you, said you'd know what to do." Lillian turned to Isaiah, decision already made. "Sam Jenkins was my father's oldest friend. He helped me after Papa died. I have to go." Isaiah nodded without hesitation. "I'll saddle the horses." Within minutes, they were mounted and following Peter back toward the Jenkins place, pushing their horses as fast as was safe in the gathering darkness. Lillian's mind raced with worry. Old Sam was well into his 70s, and while still spry for his age, a barn collapse could easily prove fatal. "How did it happen?" she called to Peter as they rode. "Not sure," the boy shouted back. "Mr. Jenkins was alone when it happened. Pa and I were just passing by when we heard the crash. Found him pinned under a beam, conscious but unable to move." They reached the Jenkins farm 30 minutes later, guided by the lanterns that blazed in the yard. The scene was one of controlled chaos, several men working to shore up what remained of the collapsed barn, while others carefully removed debris. Lillian dismounted before her horse had fully stopped, handing the reins to Peter. She approached the barn, Isaiah close behind her. Inside the partially collapsed structure, she found Mr. Wilson directing the rescue efforts. "Lillian, thank God," Wilson said when he spotted her. "Sam's trapped under that beam. We've been afraid to move it. Without more support, the whole thing could come down on him." She peered into the shadows where Wilson pointed and saw old Sam, his face pale with dust and pain, pinned from the waist down by a massive support beam. "Lillian, girl, is that you?" the old man called weakly. "I'm here, Sam," she replied, kneeling as close as she could safely get. "We're going to get you out." "Knew you'd come," he mumbled. "Just like your pa. Always there when needed." Isaiah had already begun assessing the situation, examining the fallen beams and the structure that still stood. "We need to support this section before we try to lift that beam," he said to Wilson. "Otherwise, we risk bringing down what's left of the roof." Wilson nodded. "That's what I figured, but we don't have enough men or materials." "The wagon," Lillian said suddenly. "Sam's wagon has support jacks for when he repairs it. They might be strong enough to hold the weight while we lift the beam." Isaiah squeezed her shoulder in approval before turning to Wilson. "Where would those be kept?" "In the tool shed just behind the house," Wilson replied. Isaiah and 2 other men went to retrieve the jacks while Lillian stayed with Sam, trying to keep him conscious and calm. The old man's breathing was labored, and she feared internal injuries beyond what they could see. "How long have you been pinned, Sam?" she asked, taking his hand. "Since this afternoon," he wheezed. "Was checking the hayloft. Rotten boards gave way." "We're going to get you out," she promised. "Just hold on a little longer." Isaiah returned with the jacks, and the men worked quickly to position them around the unstable section of the barn. With each passing minute, Lillian could see Sam weakening, his grip on her hand growing more feeble. Finally, Isaiah announced they were ready to lift the beam. "Everyone in position," he called out. "On my count. 1, 2, 3. Lift." The men strained against the massive beam, muscles bulging with effort. For a terrible moment, it seemed immovable. Then, inch by agonizing inch, it began to rise. "Now, Lillian," Isaiah shouted. She darted forward and, with the help of Mr. Wilson, carefully pulled Sam free from beneath the beam. No sooner had they dragged him clear than the men lost their grip, and the beam crashed back down, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. Sam lay unconscious but breathing on the barn floor. In the lantern light, Lillian could see blood soaking through his trousers. "We need to get him to Dr. Parker," she said urgently. They fashioned a stretcher from a barn door and blankets, carefully loading the injured man onto it. As they carried him toward Wilson's wagon, Sam stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Lillian," he rasped, reaching for her hand. "My place. It's yours now." "Don't talk like that," she admonished him gently. "You're going to be fine." Sam's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Listen, girl. No family left. Made a will. Lawyer has it. The place is yours. Use it to save your ranch." Before she could respond, his eyes rolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness again. Lillian exchanged a worried glance with Isaiah, who had heard the exchange. "Let's get him to the doctor," Isaiah said quietly. "That's what matters now." They loaded Sam into the wagon, and Mr. Wilson prepared to drive him to town. Lillian insisted on accompanying them, unwilling to leave her father's old friend in his time of need. "I'll follow on horseback," Isaiah told her, "in case you need anything in town." The journey to Willow Creek seemed interminable, with every bump in the road drawing a pained groan from the unconscious Sam. By the time they reached Dr. Parker's house on the edge of town, Lillian's nerves were frayed raw with worry. The doctor, roused from his bed, took charge immediately, directing them to bring Sam into his surgery. "Wait outside," he ordered as he closed the door, leaving Lillian, Isaiah, and Mr. Wilson in his front parlor. The hours that followed were among the longest of Lillian's life. She paced the small room, alternately praying and cursing under her breath. Isaiah sat quietly in a corner chair, his steady presence a comfort even in silence. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Parker finally emerged, his face grave and exhausted. "I've done what I can," he said, wiping blood from his hands with a cloth. "His legs are badly crushed, and there's internal bleeding. I've managed to stop it for now, but—" He shook his head. "He's asking for you, Lillian." She followed the doctor into the small surgery, steeling herself for what she would find. Sam lay on the table, his lower body heavily bandaged, his face ashen against the white pillow. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by pain and blood loss. "Sam," she whispered, taking his cold hand in hers. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with effort. "Lillian, girl, did I dream it, or did I tell you about the will?" "You told me," she confirmed, tears pricking at her eyes. "But you should save your strength. We can talk about this when you're better." A faint smile touched his cracked lips. "Always were a terrible liar, just like your pa." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Listen now. The lawyer Jeffries has my will. Farm's all yours. Sell it, use the money to pay your bank note. Your pa would want you to keep the ranch." "Sam, please, no arguments," he interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm despite his condition. "Done my time on this earth. Made my peace. Just want to know my place will go to someone who'll respect it." Lillian couldn't hold back her tears any longer. They slid silently down her cheeks as she clutched the old man's hand. "I'll respect it, Sam. I promise." "Good girl." His eyes drifted closed, then opened again with visible effort. "That fella of yours, the tall one. He's a good man. Saw it right away." "He's not my—" Lillian began, but Sam was already continuing. "Reminds me of your pa, solid. Trustworthy." His breathing grew more labored. "Don't let him get away, you hear? Life's too short for pride." Before Lillian could respond, Dr. Parker stepped in. "That's enough for now. He needs rest." She nodded, gently placing Sam's hand back on the bed. "I'll be right outside," she promised him. In the parlor, she found Isaiah waiting alone, Mr. Wilson having gone home to his family. One look at her face, and he was on his feet, crossing to her in 2 long strides. "How is he?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lillian shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Isaiah didn't hesitate, he simply opened his arms, and she stepped into them, allowing herself to be held as the tears came in earnest. His arms around her were strong and secure, his chest solid against her cheek. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and reassuring, as one hand smoothed her hair in a gesture of comfort that broke through the last of her defenses. "He's dying," she finally managed to say, her voice muffled against Isaiah's shirt. "He's dying, and he's leaving me his farm, and I can't." "Shoo," Isaiah soothed. "One thing at a time. Right now, you're here for him. That's what matters." She nodded, drawing strength from his calm certainty. Reluctantly, she pulled back, though his hands remained on her shoulders, anchoring her. "Thank you," she said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "For everything. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there tonight." "You'd have figured it out," Isaiah said with quiet confidence. "You're stronger than you know, Lillian." She met his gaze, struck by the warmth she found there. In that moment, she wanted nothing more than to lean back into his embrace, to let someone else be the strong one for a change. But Sam's condition demanded her attention, and she stepped away, composing herself. "I should stay with him," she said. "You don't have to wait, it could be hours, or—" "I'm not going anywhere," Isaiah said simply. And he didn't. Through the long day that followed, as Sam's condition worsened, Isaiah remained at the doctor's house, bringing Lillian coffee, ensuring she ate something, and providing silent support when words would have been inadequate. As evening approached, Dr. Parker called Lillian back to Sam's bedside. "It won't be long now," he said gently. "His heart is failing." Lillian sat beside the old man, holding his hand as his breathing grew more labored. Near the end, he opened his eyes one last time, focusing on her with surprising clarity. "Tell your cowboy," he whispered, "that she carries my future too." With those enigmatic words, he slipped away, his hand growing slack in hers. Lillian sat motionless, tears streaming unchecked down her face, until Dr. Parker gently touched her shoulder. "He's gone, Lillian. He didn't suffer at the end." She nodded, unable to speak, and allowed the doctor to lead her from the room. In the parlor, Isaiah rose to his feet, one look at her face telling him all he needed to know. The ride back to the ranch was silent, both lost in their own thoughts. Night had fallen by the time they reached home, the stars bright in a clear sky that seemed indifferent to the day's tragedy. As they cared for their horses, Lillian finally spoke. Sam said something strange at the end. She hesitated, unsure how to continue. "What was it?" Isaiah prompted gently. He said, "Tell your cowboy that she carries my future too." I don't know what he meant. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, brushing his horse with methodical strokes. "Perhaps he meant the rifle," he suggested. "That it's not just for protection but for your future, for keeping the ranch safe." "Maybe," Lillian said, though something in his tone made her wonder if he had his own interpretation. They finished their tasks and walked to the house together. At the door, Lillian paused, suddenly reluctant to enter the empty home alone, to face the reality of Sam's death and all its implications. Would you come in for coffee?" she asked, hating the vulnerability in her voice but unable to disguise it. "Of course," Isaiah replied simply. Inside, as she busied herself with the stove and coffee pot, Lillian found her mind returning to Sam's words about his farm. "I don't know if I can do it," she said abruptly. "Sell his place, it feels wrong somehow." Isaiah leaned against the counter, watching her with gentle eyes. "What would be more wrong, selling land that's no longer needed, or losing your own?" "I know you're right," she sighed. "It's just, first my parents, now Sam. Everyone who mattered is gone." "Not everyone," Isaiah said softly. Lillian looked up, meeting his gaze. The intensity she found there made her breath catch. For a suspended moment, neither moved. Then Isaiah straightened, clearing his throat. You still have people who care about you in this community. Wilson and his family, for instance. They came right away when Sam needed help. Yes, Lillian agreed, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and relief at the break in tension. You're right. They drank their coffee in companionable silence, the events of the day weighing heavily on both of them. When Isaiah finally rose to leave, Lillian walked him to the door, uncertain of what to say. Will you be all right? He asked, his hand on the doorknob. I think so, she replied. Thank you again, Isaiah, for everything. He nodded, studying her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then, in a gesture so gentle it nearly broke her heart, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow will be soon enough to face what comes next. After he left, Lillian stood at the window for a long time, watching the path to the barn where Isaiah had retreated for the night. Something had shifted between them today, something profound and possibly irreversible. The thought should have frightened her, but instead, she found it strangely comforting. As she finally turned away to prepare for bed, her gaze fell on her father's rifle, propped in its usual place by the door. Sam's final words echoed in her mind. Tell your cowboy that she carries my future too. Perhaps Isaiah was right about the meaning. Or perhaps the old man, in his final moments, had seen something between them that she was only beginning to acknowledge. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Sam's funeral was held 3 days after his death, attended by most of the town. Even in death, the old man commanded respect that transcended the usual prejudices of Willow Creek. True to his word, Sam had left his farm to Lillian in a properly executed will. The lawyer, Mr. Jeffries, confirmed that there were no other claimants and that the property was free of debt. He came to see me about 2 months ago, Jeffries explained as he handed Lillian the deed. Said he wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of if anything happened to him. He was quite fond of you, Miss Taylor. And I of him, Lillian replied, fighting back tears. With Isaiah's support, Lillian made the difficult decision to sell the Jenkins farm. To her surprise, a buyer was found quickly, a young couple from the east looking to start a new life in the west. The price they offered was more than fair, enough to pay off her bank note and leave a small cushion for future expenses. Through it all, Isaiah remained by her side, a steady presence offering practical help and quiet understanding. Their relationship continued to evolve in small, meaningful ways, lingering glances over the dinner table, hands brushing as they worked side by side, conversations that stretched late into the evening, revealing more of themselves to each other with each passing day. Yet neither had taken the step to acknowledge what was growing between them. Lillian found herself both anticipating and dreading the moment when words would be required. What if she had misread his interest? What if he was simply being kind to a woman in difficult circumstances? The matter came to a head in late October, as they prepared the ranch for the first frost. They had spent the day securing the last of the hay in the barn and checking that the cattle were ready for the coming winter. As evening fell, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Winter will be here soon, Lillian observed, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders against the cooling air. Isaiah agreed. But the ranch is in good shape to face it. Better than when I arrived. Something in his tone caught Lillian's attention. You sound like you're saying goodbye. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. I've been thinking about moving on, he finally admitted. Now that you've paid off the bank note and the major repairs are done. Though she had half expected it, the words still landed like a physical blow. I see, she managed to say, fighting to keep her voice steady. When? I haven't decided, he replied. Soon, perhaps. Is it something I've done? She asked, hating how vulnerable the question made her feel. Isaiah turned to her then, his expression pained. No, Lillian. Nothing like that. You've been. He paused, searching for words. These weeks have been among the best of my life. Then why leave? The question escaped before she could stop it. Because staying gets harder every day, he said, his voice low and intense. Being near you, working beside you, sharing meals and conversation. And knowing that eventually, I'll have to move on. Why do you have to move on? Lillian pressed, her heart pounding. Why is that a certainty? Isaiah stood abruptly, moving to the edge of the porch. His back to her, he braced his hands on the railing. Because men like me don't get to stay, Lillian. Don't get to have. He gestured vaguely. This, a home, a future. Lillian rose and moved to stand beside him, close but not touching. What aren't you telling me, Isaiah? What is it that makes you believe you don't deserve those things? The silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken truths. Finally, Isaiah sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. I was married once, he said, so quietly she had to strain to hear. In Missouri before I left. Her name was Grace. Lillian's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice even. What happened? She died, Isaiah said simply, along with our unborn child. Fever took them both while I was away working a cattle drive. I came home to find them buried. Oh, Isaiah, Lillian breathed. I'm so sorry. He nodded, accepting her sympathy with a tight jaw. I couldn't stay after that. The house, the town, everything reminded me of her. So I left. Been moving ever since. How long ago was this? Lillian asked gently. 5 years, he replied. Long enough that the sharpest pain has dulled. But the guilt remains. Guilt? She echoed. Why would you feel guilty? I wasn't there when she needed me, Isaiah said, his voice raw with emotion long suppressed. I was chasing better wages, a better future for us. If I'd been home. You might have died too, Lillian pointed out. Or maybe not. But you can't know that, Isaiah. You can't carry that burden. He turned to her then, his eyes reflecting pain but also something else, a hunger for absolution, for understanding. I've never told anyone that before, he admitted. Not the full story. Thank you for trusting me with it, Lillian said softly. They stood side by side, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. The silence between them now was different, charged with shared understanding and unspoken possibilities. Lillian, Isaiah finally said, turning to face her fully. I should leave. It would be the sensible thing to do. And if I asked you to stay? She whispered, scarcely able to believe her own boldness. His eyes searched hers, hope warring with caution. Why would you want that? Because in all my life, I've never met anyone who sees me as clearly as you do, Lillian said, the truth flowing from her heart to her lips without filter. Because when you're here, this place feels like a home again, not just land I'm duty-bound to protect. Because she faltered, then gathered her courage. Because I'm falling in love with you, Isaiah Marshall, and I think you might feel the same. The words hung between them, irretrievable and transformative. For a heartbeat, Isaiah remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, with gentle deliberation, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. I do feel the same, he said, his voice rough with emotion. God help me, I've tried not to. Tried to remember that I came here to work, to help you save your ranch, and then move on as I always have. But you, Lillian Taylor. He smiled softly. You make me want to stay, to build something lasting, to believe in a future again. Lillian leaned into his touch, her heart soaring. Then stay, she whispered. Stay and build that future with me. Isaiah's answer came not in words but in the tender press of his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, before deepening into something that spoke of longing finally acknowledged, of two lonely souls finding harbor in each other. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I'm still afraid," he confessed. "Afraid of losing again. Afraid of not being enough." "I'm afraid too," Lillian admitted. "Life has taken so much from both of us. But perhaps that's why we found each other to be brave together." Isaiah smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and erased years of solitary wandering from his face. "Brave together," he repeated, as if testing the words. "I like the sound of that." They stood together on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, as the night deepened around them. The future stretched before them uncertain, perhaps, but no longer to be faced alone. In the months that followed, the Taylor Ranch underwent a transformation that went beyond the physical repairs and improvements. With Isaiah now officially a partner rather than a hired hand, the place took on new life. They expanded the cattle herd, using some of the money from the sale of Sam's farm to purchase quality breeding stock. Isaiah's experience as a foreman proved invaluable as they planned for the ranch's long-term success. Word spread through Willow Creek that Miss Taylor was no longer alone in her endeavors. While some tongues wagged disapprovingly at the arrangement, an unmarried woman living on the same property as a man not her husband, others, particularly those who had known Thomas Taylor, expressed quiet satisfaction that his daughter had found someone worthy of sharing her father's legacy. The McIntosh brothers and Edward Grantham maintained their distance, though Lillian remained vigilant. The rifle was still her constant companion when she rode the boundaries of her property, a fact that continued to draw stares in town. But now, when whispers followed her about her unladylike habits, she found them easier to ignore. Winter settled over the land, transforming the countryside with blankets of snow and ice. Inside the Taylor Ranch house, however, warmth prevailed. The evenings were filled with conversation and laughter as Lillian and Isaiah shared stories of their pasts and dreams of their future. He had moved from the barn to the house after a proper proposal, offered on bended knee beside the fireplace one snowy November evening. Their wedding was planned for the spring, when travel would be easier for the circuit preacher. One crisp December morning, Lillian woke to find Isaiah already gone from their bed. Dressing quickly against the chill, she found him in the kitchen, coffee already brewing on the stove. "Early riser," she commented, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. He turned in her embrace, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." "Good things or worrying things?" she asked, searching his face. "Good," he assured her. "Very good. I have something to show you, actually. Once you've had your coffee." Curiosity piqued, Lillian hurried through her morning routine. When they had both eaten and the dishes were cleared away, Isaiah led her to the barn, where he unlocked a small storeroom he'd been using as a workshop. Inside, she gasped at what she found: a cradle, beautifully crafted from oak, with delicate carvings along the sides. "Isaiah," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful. When did you?" "Been working on it in the evenings when you thought I was doing barn chores," he admitted with a smile. "I know we've talked about children someday. Thought we should be prepared." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes as she took in the love and care evident in every detail of the cradle. "It's perfect," she said, turning to embrace him. "Absolutely perfect." Isaiah held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said quietly. "A chance at family, at putting down roots. You gave me that, Lillian." She looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "We gave it to each other." As they walked hand in hand back to the house, the winter sun breaking through the clouds to sparkle on the snow, Lillian felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. Her rifle stood propped by the door where she had left it, still necessary, still a part of who she was. But no longer her only companion, no longer the sole guardian of her future. That spring, as wildflowers carpeted the hills and new calves filled the pastures. Lillian Taylor became Lillian Marshall in a simple ceremony on their ranch. The guests were few but significant: Mr. Wilson and his family, Dr. Parker, and even Mrs. Peterson, who had gradually warmed to Lillian once it became clear that her unconventional ways hadn't prevented her from making a respectable match after all. As Lillian and Isaiah exchanged vows beneath an arch of early roses, a rifle leaned against a nearby tree, cleaned and polished for the occasion, a blue ribbon tied around its barrel, a symbol of the strength that had sustained her through the darkest times, and of the future she now shared with the man beside her. At the reception afterward, as neighbors and friends offered their congratulations, Hank McIntosh and his brothers made a surprise appearance. They approached the newlyweds with an awkward formality that suggested they had been sent rather than coming of their own accord. "Miss Taylor, Mrs. Marshall, I should say," Hank began, twisting his hat in his hands. "Mr. Grantham sends his congratulations and this." He held out an envelope. Warily, Lillian accepted it. Inside was a formal letter acknowledging the Taylor Ranch's water rights and abandoning all claims to the disputed northern boundary. It was signed by Edward Grantham and witnessed by the county judge. "Mr. Grantham says to tell you he respects a fighter," Bert added. "Says you've earned the right to your land, fair and square." Isaiah's arm tightened around Lillian's waist. "That's mighty generous of Mr. Grantham," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Please convey our thanks." The brothers nodded and quickly took their leave, clearly uncomfortable among the celebration. "Well," Lillian said, staring after them in disbelief, "I never thought I'd see the day." Isaiah chuckled. "Perhaps even Edward Grantham knows when he's beaten. Or perhaps he's simply decided there are easier targets than a woman who refuses to put down her rifle and the man who stands beside her." "Speaking of which," Lillian said, glancing at the decorated rifle, "I never did tell you what Sam's last words meant." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "I thought we decided he was talking about your rifle, that it protected your future." "That's what I thought too at first," Lillian said, turning to face her new husband fully. "But I've been thinking about it more recently, and I believe he meant something else. Something he saw before either of us did." "And what's that?" Isaiah asked, his eyes warm with affection. Lillian placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach, watching as understanding dawned in Isaiah's eyes. "I believe he meant this future," she said softly. "Our child." Isaiah's face transformed with wonder and joy. "Are you certain?" he whispered. "As certain as Dr. Parker could make me last week," she confirmed, laughing as Isaiah swept her into his arms, lifting her clear off the ground in his excitement. "A child," he breathed as he set her down again. "Our child. The first of many, I hope," Lillian said, nestling against his chest. As their guests looked on with indulgent smiles at the obvious happiness of the newlyweds, Lillian felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had led her here had been difficult, marked by loss and struggle, but it had also made her strong enough to hold on to what mattered, to fight for her land and her independence, to recognize a kindred spirit in Isaiah when fate brought him to her door. She thought of her father, of the rifle he had placed in her hands and the responsibilities he had entrusted to her. She had carried them both faithfully, even when the weight seemed too much to bear alone. Now, she would carry something else as well: a new life, a new beginning, a future built on love and shared strength. In the years that followed, the Marshall Ranch, as it came to be known, though Lillian insisted on keeping the Taylor name in the legal documents, prospered under their joint care. Their family grew with the addition of first a daughter, then twin sons, each welcomed into the cradle Isaiah had crafted with such love. Lillian continued to carry her rifle when necessary, teaching each of her children in turn the responsibility and respect that came with it. The townsfolk gradually ceased their disapproving whispers, coming instead to admire the determination that had allowed her to hold onto her heritage against all odds. And Isaiah, who had once believed his chance at happiness was behind him, found a peace he had thought forever lost. In Lillian, he discovered not just a partner but a mirror to his own strength, someone who understood the value of perseverance, of fighting for what mattered, of building a life that honored the past while embracing the future. Together, they created something neither could have managed alone. A home filled with love, a ranch that thrived, a legacy worthy of those who had come before and those who would follow after. And through it all, the rifle remained no longer a symbol of Lillian's solitary struggle, but a reminder of the journey that had brought them together, and of the future they carried side by side.